Today, there are a handful of OSs that are arguably important, and among them, those with the Linux kernel are the most important due to their widespread use on the back end. But, for every OS developed, it was likely developed at first on another OS. And in the case of Linux, that OS was MINIX. And MINIX was significant for other reasons than just Linux, so how did it play a role in the development of Linux? What else is it significant for? What was it like? And what happened to it? Those are some great questions, so let's get started. Alright, so let's start with some history. MINIX began life as a teaching utility by Andrew Tanenbaum, a professor at the Vrije Universitet, who had recently published a textbook titled Operating Systems Design and Implementation. Some things to real briefly discuss. First, MINIX was not the first OS to bear this name, because there was an OS called MINIX developed by Digital Systems House Inc., which was based off of AT&T Unix. Second, the name MINIX can be derived from either minimal Unix or mini Unix. I don't know which one of these is more accurate, but they basically imply the same thing. During the 1990s, MINIX was arguably at its peak in popularity and was used by many hobbyists, including a guy called Linus Torvalds. According to his own biography, just for fun, he read Tanenbaum's textbook and it had immense influence on him, leading him to buy a PC to replace his previous computer and figure out what he did and didn't like. One of the main things that he didn't like was MINIX's handling of terminal emulation, and so he decided that he would write it himself. He wrote a program to do this, then realized he would need another driver to get it working, and so he wrote that. He then wanted to save posts locally, so then he added a hard drive driver. And then he also added a file system, and eventually this culminated in August of 1991, the first version of the Linux kernel. MINIX would continue to be used in Torvalds' toolchain until he accidentally nuked his MINIX partition, making Linux self-sufficient. A real brief note here in that in Linux early days, Torvalds used the MINIX Usenet group as a important platform to promote the OS, or kernel. And Tanenbaum didn't really like this, and this culminated in early 1992 when Tanenbaum posted on the Usenet group that Linux was quote-unquote obsolete. This resulted in the Tanenbaum-Torvalds debate, which is sometimes referred to as a flame war, which went over a number of topics and was more of an argument. Despite this, Tanenbaum and Torvalds continued to be on good terms, and in the mid-2000s, Tanenbaum and the rest of the MINIX development team felt that the OS, now in version 2.0, had become quite bloated, and so rewrote it to perform well on embedded systems, and more importantly, be very reliable and self-healing. The end result was MINIX 3. It got support for ARM in its eventual final stable release in 2014, which was the same year that Tanenbaum retired from the university that he, in fact, was at when he created MINIX. And in 2017, despite mostly falling out of repair, MINIX 3 got a bit of attention when it turned out that Intel had been using it for a chip/feature called the Intel Management Engine. It's complicated, but to put it simply, due to this, people argued that MINIX was the most widely used operating system in the world because regardless of if you're using Windows, macOS, Haiku, Linux, MINIX, or even OpenSteelOS, there's a chip on your motherboard that contains and runs MINIX. If you ignore the fact that several OEMs have disabled the management engine due to other reasons, mainly that people argue that it's a security risk. An article from Tom Holverda, published on OS News, stated that Tanenbaum retired in 2014, and given that he's now in his 80s as of 2026, it's quite logical that MINIX development activity has declined heavily since 2014, and the last commit on its Git repository was in November of 2018, and by all extensive purposes, as of 2026, this OS is basically 6 feet under the ground, which honestly is kind of a shame because there's some things that I, as an OS developer, think that are quite amazing, primarily the self-healing thing, but not to go in much detail about that. So real briefly, before I go into proper detail on the OS, I want to talk about the book that I've brought up multiple times. Operating Systems Design and Implementation. This book goes over a lot of resources and things that are quite useful for developing an operating system, and the book uses MINIX as a primary example. It is a great book if you want to learn about operating systems or even develop an operating system, alongside a number of other books that I have shown here, so I would highly suggest that you read it. This version of it even comes with a CD-ROM. Oh, wait. For sale only in India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. Oh. How did this get shipped to the US state of Michigan? Well, regardless, I think that we should go look at MINIX in more detail now, and see what it is actually like. When I went to install this, I opted for a physical computer, and I didn't test it in a virtual machine first. After experiencing issues related to network stuff, I then realized, oh, this doesn't want to cooperate with anything in my collection, which is odd because I have, like, what feels like a bajillion computers at my disposal. As such, we're going to be using VirtualBox on my main desktop PC, and because of the fact that I'm using a screen recording, that means obligatory you-know-who is going to be showing up now, but again, she doesn't really have any narration here. I'm still going to be narrating in the background. So, let's start with installation. Apologies if it's blurry here, because I forgot to change the settings back after a school project, but as we can see here, NASA set the RAM to 512 megabytes and the hard drive to, I think, 20 gigabytes. Logging in to set up the system is fairly simple, as you simply log in as root and then type setup. Setup will first ask you for your keyboard type, ask you if you want to do disk management the easy or the hard way. I personally would suggest doing it the easy way, unless you have an OS already on your computer. Ask you how big your home directory should be, in addition to the size of the file system block, and then it's off to the races for installation. After it's done installing all the files, you then have to select a network chip. You should ideally go with the one that is selected through PCI if it finds one, because if not, then you're going to have a very fun time after that. And after just configuring a couple network things, that's basically the end of the main bit of installation. After you first start up MINIX for the first time, once it's freshly installed, you now have to do a number of other steps. First of all, the thing to address is that there aren't really many packages installed on MINIX out of the box, and so you have to update the pkgin database. Note that on older versions of MINIX, there was not pkgin, but instead pacman with a K, but installing packages is fairly straightforward. You'll also have to ideally set the time zone information, in addition to the host name, and then set up a user account, which can be very complicated if you've never figured out how to set up user accounts on Unix. By Unix, I also mean Unix-like things like even Linux. And to put it bluntly, this took a very long time for NASA to figure out. So once everything is actually all done and dusted in terms of setting it up, what can you actually do with MINIX? To be honest, not really much. There's stuff that you can do with it, but there isn't much that you can do with it. It comes with top and VI out of the box, VI being very similar to Vim. However, if you want some good training ground to getting used to Linux and Unix commands, MINIX in a virtual machine may be very ideal, because it gives you a very minimal environment that basically gives you a lot of free ground to use to learn about different Unix commands. Arguably, MINIX is also a relatively ideal development environment to this day, at least assuming you don't need to do much complicated stuff, and your toolchain is very simple. You can write very minimal C programs in it just fine, such as here, where NASA opted to write a counter program, and then had a whole lot of difficulty getting it working and debugging it. You can also experiment with basic networking stuff on here, such as with the ping command. However, that's basically going to be that in terms of the operating system, and so while there's other things that you could do, like, for example, play around with the X window management system, we're not going to really go into detail on that for this video. And NASA then opted to shut this down from the root account, and that's going to be it for the OS. To conclude, MINIX is relatively significant, but also relatively obscure. MINIX is probably best remembered for being a major stepping stone in making Linux a thing, and for its use in the Intel management engine, in addition to being used for a textbook. Would you agree? Have you used MINIX before? If so, what are your thoughts on it? Did you enjoy this video? Or is there something I could improve with my content? If you have anything to say, feel free to let me know down below in the comments, and that'll do it for this video. So with that, thanks for watching, and have a nice day.